Alright, now that we have our display removed, the next step to do is to basically go ahead and clean it from all this glue residue we have. Now, one of the easiest ways to clean it is just to use your fingers. Basically, any of the glue that's still residual on there, try to remove with your fingers as much as possible. It's the easiest way to do without scratching it. Basically, your finger's not going to scratch the display. Just make sure there's no shavings or anything on it that might be pushed around, or glass pieces that might scratch it. So we're just going to use our thumbs to go ahead and clean away as much of this residue as possible. Sometimes, and it depends upon the maker of the phone or who makes the display, sometimes the glue's a little bit harder to remove than others. Sometimes it'll come off in big chunks, and other times, kind of like this one here, you've got a lot of kind of the thinner glue that's a little bit harder to get removed. In that case, I would suggest using basically a 95% or higher isopropyl alcohol. You want to make sure that it's as high as possible to get it removed. I find that to be what works best. A lot of people say to use acetone as well. Alcohol is easier for me to find, and it's cheaper in a lot of ways to get the high percentage that doesn't have any smells or any coloring or anything like that. I like to use the clear stuff. So go ahead and just try to get as much of this glue off as possible. Whatever's left, you may have to use an alcohol and some rag. I like to use a microfiber cloth to remove it. You can usually find them pretty cheap. They don't have to be thick, or they don't have to be high quality. You just want to make sure that they're not super rough when you're trying to use it, or basically so they won't disperse like a paper towel would when you're trying to move it across some glue. So try to remove it off all these edges, all the way around the phone. You don't want anything residual on it. You want it to be as clear as possible, no little chunks. If you leave anything behind, any dust or debris on the display before you put your optical clear adhesive, it'll show up. It'll look like maybe a dead pixel or some dust under the screen. So do a pretty thorough job on trying to clean it. Try to get as much of the glue off the back as possible as well. Sometimes it'll kind of push over. So we're going to go ahead and use some of the alcohol and a microfiber cloth here. The nice thing about these AMOLED displays is they don't really have a backlight that you can damage. So you don't have to worry about this alcohol going everywhere. It's not plugged in, so there's no actual reasoning that it would use an electric charge. So you can use a lot of it and not worry about any backlight leakage. It does take some pressure to remove. You want to be careful when you're doing this. You'll see the display will kind of pick up. There's a little bit of play in it. Don't push down extremely hard on it, but you do want to rub it around. Circles seem to work pretty good, and then in the very end, up and down strokes to get as much of it removed as possible. So spread it around just a little bit. Let it soak in, and then you can use a fingernail or even a opening tool, a safe opening tool, or a playing card to help you kind of remove it off. Something that's not going to scratch it, something that's plastic. It is pretty resilient for a display. I see a lot of people use a razor blade on displays. That always freaks me out a little bit. I prefer just to put in a little extra elbow grease. I don't want to scratch anything. So here's our opening tool. Basically what I'm going to do is just basically rub it down, and it won't clean it. You're just trying to remove the top layer of glue that's keeping the alcohol from cleaning the display. So you can see it's kind of just being spread around more than anything else. Then if you take your rag here and clean it, it'll remove the majority of it off. That can be an easier way to get it done. You basically just want to repeat this process until the entire screen is glue free. Now, normally before this part actually even happens, I would have tested my screen, Make sure it still works. Really, right after I cut it out of the phone, I actually just kind of forgot. I've done so many of these at this point that I don't ever really have a problem with them not functioning, but I would suggest doing it. That way you don't waste your time. I'll hook it up here in just 2 seconds and we'll test it and see if it still functions properly for us. So that's my method of cleaning a display. Let's just go ahead and hook it up to its logic board here. We'll see if it still turns on and shows a picture. If you've cracked it or something, or you'll normally will see that right away. Sometimes it won't even turn on at all if you've cracked it in the middle. So let's use your fingers to press the battery in place, and then a tool to turn the power button on here. Make sure your battery's lined up correctly. Starting to worry me. Contacts aren't lined up properly. Let's turn it around so I can see it better here. Perfect, there we go. Wait for the splash screen to hit and see if there's anything that's funky on it. Perfect. It still functions properly for us, it looks like. You can't wait for it to load and test the touch if you really want to. Normally if you've gotten to this point, you won't have any sort of an issue with it. Oh, it's going to take us... Forgot this was a Sprint one, so it'll take a second to get it loaded up. We probably won't wait for that, but see the display still functions properly for us, at least. It still shows a picture. No white spots or yellowing on it, looks like, so did a good job removing it. Now normally when we do this I like to use a LOCA mold when I go to use and apply the adhesive. Unfortunately I don't have one for this. I'm just going to use the old bezel of the phone as the display. We're going to use some of our LOCA glue. I've kind of started to take a liking to X Factor, the sticky icky. Really the thicker glues seem to bubble less. Get a little less runoff as well. Now what you can do at this point, if you want to just go ahead and glue it in and leave it in its display if you're not changing the frame, you can go ahead and put your back button, menu button, home button in and basically glue the glass back into it and you'll get a nice sturdy fit. You won't have to adhere a lot to it, so that's a good way. I like to really change my bezels if I'm doing a display change. If I've torn it down this far, I might as well. So what we're going to do is use the bezel as a guide to putting the glass down. I'm going to use my opening tool here to help me lay it down nice and easy onto the glass. Just going to move the glue around a little bit, get it to disperse. If you see any particles of dust here, go ahead and remove them. Now also one thing that is okay is if you have streaking on your glass from the alcohol if you've been removing it with, that will actually disappear once it hits the LOCA. You'll see that you can see the streaks on it right now. It looks like dirty glass, but that'll go away. So now I'm going to turn my safe opening tool down and we're going to gently slide it out until it makes contact. Now the reason why I do this is to really stay away from getting any bubbles on the display. If you let it just fall down flat, you'll get a ton of bubbles from where the glue will meet itself. So we've got the one corner, it looks like it's the highest point. So we're just going to let our tool sit here, let it ease its way in. If you get impatient in this part, that's how you get bubbles in your display. Once you see it start to kind of slow down or stop, I'm just going to gently pull it out a little bit more until it gets started again. Starting to get to move. The goal is you want this upper corner to hit and touch. If before it starts going down the center. You want the glass to touch the LOCA from the top all the way through the middle, then to the bottom. You don't want the bottom to touch first, have the LOCA meet in the middle, then you're going to have a bubble right in the middle of your display, which is really tricky to get out. If you have a bubble, which does happen fairly often, you want it to be near one of the corners so you can push it out. And I'll show you how to do that. I'll probably have a bubble in this one at some point, I'm sure. So just gently sliding this pry tool down. It's going down the center. I'm going to pull it out, and sometimes the bezels, being the thickness around the edge, makes it a little bit more tricky than a local mold. So you can see it's going down the center very well. Oh, so right here, this is where you'd catch a bubble. If it doesn't meet in a corner very well, a bubble will happen. So it looks like it's actually going okay. I'm going to give it a little push here, try to stop it from making a bubble. So if two edges were to hit before the middle is touched on this LOCA glue, that's where you get a bubble. We lucked out. If you do get a bubble right in the center and you can't get it out, I would go ahead and pull the glass back off, wipe it down with alcohol, clean the entire thing, clean the glass, the display again, and start over. There's no point in leaving a bubble in your display after you've gone through so much trouble to fix a broken or cracked glass on it. So now what you can do is you can just let it set for a second. A lot of people say don't press down on it. I'm the opposite of that. You can use it to help spread it in the direction that you want it to go. Really the trickiest parts for me to get the LOCA to get into and stay and use the right amount of it is right in the corners. So I'll try to get it to go that direction. Sometimes right on the very sides, right in this middle of the sides, it can be a little tricky to get the LOCA to flow out there nice as well. Push it out. It almost acts like as a vacuum or a suction. When you get it to the corners, it'll almost suck it down, and you don't have a problem getting it to stay. On occasion, if you have a little bit of too little glue in the corners, you might have to hold it while you put it under the UV light. Make sure the corners are snapped in on the glass as well. And the bezel, sometimes it'll hold it up and it won't want to sit down properly. So like I was saying, if you have your home button, your back button, and your menu button installed right here, you can just go ahead and put it on the black light and leave it be. You get a nice tight seal on it. I want to change out the bezel on this phone, so I will use a different bezel on it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my microfiber cloth, some alcohol here, and clean up as much of the LOCA around the edges as possible. The reason why I'm doing this is when you put it under the UV light, sometimes it gets really stuck and it can be hard to get out of the mid frame. So I want to clean it up as much as possible. Squeeze a little bit, see how much LOCA will come out of it. Now if you do have a bubble and it's right in the corner, what you can do is basically push your finger across the display into the corner where the bubble's at. You'll see it kind of move a little bit. Keep doing that until the bubble escapes out of the device. Now if you can't get it out, like I was saying, that's up to you. I mean, if you want to leave the bubble in there and put the glass back on the display, just realize that normally once you have re-adhered the glass to the display again with a liquid optical clear adhesive, there's really no getting it back off. It's really stuck on there after that point. So just be aware of that. Make sure it's what you want before you get started with the UV light. Alright, so we've removed as much of the LOCA on the sides as it looks like we're going to get. Let's move my finger down, getting as much of it out of there as possible. Alright, so we're looking good. And every time I squeeze, a little bit more comes out, so. Now, the thinner the layer of optical clear adhesive is, I think the better off the display is, to be honest with you. A lot of people, technically these phones aren't made with liquid optical clear adhesive, they're actually optical clear adhesive sheets. So this is not basically what the factory uses to repair these phones. It can be used. Really crappy LOCA will yellow over time. So spend a little bit of money and get a little bit better glue. We're going to take our UV light. This is just a gel nail UV light. I think I got for 20 bucks off of Amazon. Salon Express or something. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy. Go ahead and flip the UV light on here. Alright, now once you've made sure the display is what you want, there's no bubbles, doesn't look like there's any dust in it, you're happy with it, you're going to go ahead and slide it under this UV light. Now once you put it under there, there's really no going back. It does cure pretty quickly. Now if you have to hold it down to get the corner to stick, just say you've used just a barely too little bit of LOCA, you can just leave your finger in there for a second, maybe 10 seconds, and normally it'll stick down enough where you can remove your hand and it'll be just fine. So give it about, I don't know, 30 seconds, and then we'll flip it over and do the opposite side. Leave it there for a little bit longer. Kind of cure it and bake it in there. Alright, now what I did do is I did tape down the display cable here, make it a little bit easier to work with. We'll also keep LOCA from getting onto it. Alright, so we're looking pretty good. The next step is to go ahead and remove it. And it can be a little bit tricky out of these frames. Sometimes I'll use a Dremel and cut the frame out, so there's less parts of it to get stuck to. You can kind of push right here in the camera opening. You want to be very careful as you're doing this. You don't want to damage it. You can heat it up a little bit if you need to. Use a razor blade to get it out. A suction cup is usually what I would use. So we're just going to connect it. And let's just make sure that it's still functioning properly for us. Alright, well it definitely still turns on, which is the plus. So, next step is to go ahead and remove it out of the bezel here. Like I was saying, that can be a little bit tricky, so just take your time as you're doing it. You can use a razor blade to cut it out, push in this little hole right here to get it started. And don't put a ton of force on it. It is still something that can be cracked and broken. Sometimes you can put your tool in, just wiggle it down here at the bottom, and it'll pop right out for you. Use a suction cup like this, can help you get it removed. Like I was saying, don't use a ton of force. You don't want to damage your newly put on display. Got a little bit of glue on my tool here, makes it a little bit harder to get it off. doesn't want to attach. A little bit too big of a suction cup for this Mini. Now unfortunately, my camera dies before I get this out completely. So once you have it out, go ahead and move on to the next video. It'll be down in the description. Hit the like button if you found this helpful. And as always, subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.